Library of Alexandria version 2? Can we make it so that all the published works of humankind be accessible to anybody?
For centuries, the truth behind the Library of Alexandria was buried in dust and doubt. But now, an advanced AI has pieced together hidden clues, and what it found is stunning. This isn't the peaceful story of lost knowledge. It's darker, stranger, and far more terrifying than anyone ever imagined. The truth is finally out, and it changes everything. The truth about the Library of Alexandria. When the Library of Alexandria is mentioned, people usually do so with amazement. Many see it as a representation of ancient knowledge, a hidden treasure trove of information that had the potential to make a significant impact on the world. They envision it as a mystical sanctuary where long-forgotten mysteries about the cosmos were preserved, ready to be unveiled. They imagine rows of books containing groundbreaking scientific findings and wisdom so profound that even present-day scientists would be impressed. However, this idealized image is a far cry from the truth. The Library of Alexandria was not as advanced as people think. It was important and had valuable writings, but the groundbreaking ideas people imagine were not there. The contents of the library were more ordinary, and sometimes even strange or completely inaccurate. The Library of Alexandria was a famous place of education in ancient times, situated in Alexandria, Egypt. It was established by the Ptolemies with the intention of gathering every book in existence to compile all human knowledge. However, the definition of knowledge during that era was not the same as it is now. The authors of the ancient texts had a narrow grasp on science, medicine, and the world, resulting in many false beliefs. Many of the writings stored in the library were not scientific, and some may sound strange or unsettling today. For instance, in the ancient Greek play The Eumenides by Aeschylus, Apollon argues that mothers are not true parents. He believes women are just containers for the father's seed, with the father being the only true parent. Apollon even uses Athena as an example, claiming she was born from Zeus alone without a mother, to prove his point that mothers are insignificant. This concept was not just a fictional idea created for entertainment purposes. In fact, it was taken seriously by various Greek thinkers and medical professionals at that time. Medical texts from Greece in the 5th century BC indicate that even knowledgeable individuals in the field of medicine believed that the mother's body only served as a vessel for the father's seed. Today, we understand this idea to be completely false. However, during that period, it was considered a reasonable belief. Such beliefs were common in many writings housed in the Library of Alexandria, contrary to the mysterious formulas or groundbreaking scientific theories that people often envision. Why do people believe the Library of Alexandria contained powerful secrets? One reason is because it was destroyed. When something ancient and secretive vanishes, people tend to glorify it. This leads to the truth becoming distorted and myths forming. Because we will never know all the texts the library had, it is simple for individuals to imagine it once possessed things like time machines and cures for all illnesses. When we examine the available information, we see a different story. The library contained writings by various authors, including poets, playwrights, historians, philosophers, and early scientists. However, many of these early scientists did not have the tools to conduct experiments to test their theories like modern scientists do. Instead, their writings were often based on speculation, customs, or religious beliefs rather than empirical evidence. They relied on their creative thinking rather than scientific instruments. Many people in the past thought the body was composed of 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. This belief, known as the 4 humors theory, was accepted for many years. Doctors believed that illnesses were caused by imbalances in these fluids, so they utilized methods like bloodletting to restore balance. Although these concepts may seem absurd today, they were highly respected and researched during that era. These teachings would have been stored in the library's collection. Ancient people weren't entirely ignorant, as some of them had good ideas that were somewhat accurate. However, much of what was considered science back then was a blend of myths, philosophy, and mistakes. Even when they thought of the right concepts, they couldn't test or verify them. Additionally, some individuals believed that the Library of Alexandria contained knowledge that was more advanced than its time. But in reality, ancient scholars had many misconceptions about fundamental concepts. They lacked comprehension of the heart's function, were not aware of how diseases were transmitted, and had no understanding of germs, viruses, or bacteria. They also did not have access to essential tools such as microscopes, telescopes, or precise measuring instruments. Without these tools, Even the most intelligent individuals would face limitations in their knowledge. People tend to overlook the fact that the library's destruction did not eliminate all knowledge. Some of the texts from the library were also available in other locations. Many were duplicated and shared among different libraries and researchers. Thus, if there were truly groundbreaking information in those texts, we likely would have discovered it by now. However, the ancient writings that have been uncovered so far indicate that they were intriguing and occasionally significant, but they did not contain intellect-shattering secrets that are lost forever. People often overlook the fact that human knowledge grows as time passes. The wisdom of ancient civilizations set the groundwork for future innovations. But this was just the start. It mandated many years of experimentation, inquiry, and learning from errors to reach our current level of understanding. Science did not magically appear in its completed form. It was constructed gradually, with each new piece adding to the foundation. Many of the initial stages of scientific development were flawed or not yet fully realized. The Library of Alexandria was similar to a huge ancient book collection holding the most important information available during that time, which is considered limited compared to current standards. It consisted of plays, poems, myths, history, philosophical concepts, and early attempts at science and medicine. While some of the content was brilliant, others were odd or inaccurate. It's common to fantasize about the library as a place holding the answers to life's mysteries. However, the truth is not as glamorous. The biggest tragedy isn't losing advanced knowledge, but not fully valuing the effort it took to acquire our current knowledge. Knowledge isn't something that disappears forever in a fire. It is something we constantly develop, verify, enhance, and pass on to others. Instead of picturing the Library of Alexandria as a place full of lost brilliance, we should view it as a historical moment filled with human endeavors and mistakes. It was not flawless or advanced, but rather a stepping stone in our progress, and we have made significant advancements since then. Let's look into the significance of Library Alexandria, what we were never told about Alexandria. Many people today think of the Library of Alexandria as a mythical place filled with the world's most important knowledge, only to be destroyed in a tragic fire. However, this perception is not accurate. The true story is more realistic, complex, and less dramatic. The Library of Alexandria was significant, but not as unique as believed. Its destruction was not a sudden fiery event, but a slow and inevitable process. Most people today think of the Library of Alexandria as the main library of ancient times, where all knowledge was stored. However, in reality, many cities in the ancient Mediterranean had their libraries with collections of books written on scrolls. Private libraries were also common among the wealthy. Books were valuable but not as scarce as thought, and were not only found in one city. The Library of Alexandria had a major competitor in the Library of Pergamon, which also had a large and respected collection. Both libraries were significant in their right. It's similar to how the Library of Congress is highly regarded, but not the only repository for books. While losing the Library of Congress would be a huge blow, it wouldn't mean all knowledge is lost, as copies of its books are held in other libraries. The same was true for libraries in the past. Many people overlook the fact that knowledge is quite delicate. Books can deteriorate over time. Paper or scrolls can decay and gather dust. Insects may also damage the pages. Without proper maintenance, books will eventually deteriorate. In ancient times, the only way to preserve a book was to manually copy it. There were no printers, digital backups, or scanners back then. Copying a scroll was a time-consuming and costly process. It demanded a lot of effort, money, and attention to detail. Many texts were not copied due to this. Some texts may have only been found in 1 or 2 locations. If those copies deteriorated or were not copied again, the information was lost. This is why a lot of ancient writing is no longer around today. It's not just because of one building burning down, but because not enough people made an effort to preserve those writings. Ultimately, silence was the main threat to knowledge, not fire. The belief that a single fire destroyed the Library of Alexandria and altered history forever is more of a myth. In reality, the library's decline was gradual and happened over time. It was not a sudden event, but rather a series of smaller ones. Let's examine the timeline of when the library started to decline. The library was constructed when the early Ptolemaic kings of Egypt were in power. These kings aimed to turn Alexandria into a hub of education and provided significant backing to the library. It flourished and became renowned. Scholars visited from various regions. The library's collection grew over time. However, the prosperous period came to an end. Subsequent Ptolemaic leaders were not as generous, providing less funding and showing less interest in books. Some even made detrimental choices that harmed the library. Due to the lack of consistent support, the library started to decline in strength. Gradually, less scrolls were being added and fewer scholars visited, causing the institution to slowly lose its prominence. The famous fire of 48 BC is often talked about. It occurred while Julius Caesar's troops were in Alexandria and accidentally set fire to the docks. The flames then spread, causing part of the city to burn. There was probably some damage to the library's collection. However, despite the destruction, the library was not completely destroyed by this fire. Actually, we have information that the library, or something similar to it, was still around after the fire. In later years, there were writings about it, indicating that it either made it through the fire or was reconstructed shortly after. The essence of the library continued. Even though there may have been fewer scrolls, they were still present. The library continued to be a center of education for a while. However, the revival of the library was short-lived. The decline persisted as the world evolved. Wars occurred and ended, new leaders emerged, and the Roman Empire became more powerful. Alexandria found itself in the midst of these changes. The backing for the library dwindled over time. In 272 AD, the Roman Emperor Aurelian was trying to regain control of Alexandria from the Palmyrene Empire. During the battle, his troops accidentally destroyed the Bruttian quarter of the city where the library was situated. With that area gone, the library was also lost. All that was left of it, including the books, scholars, and knowledge, disappeared. When people think about a single fire destroying everything in one night, they are not understanding the full truth. In reality, the library was not lost in one big fire. It slowly deteriorated over time, with neglect from people, lack of funding, failure to copy books, and changes in the world. The loss of books in the tragedy could have been prevented if people had tried to save them. Unfortunately, they did not make the effort, and as a result, the scrolls deteriorated in silence. The Library of Alexandria is still considered significant, showing what people can accomplish when they appreciate knowledge. It should be viewed as just one of many libraries, not the only one. Its destruction did not erase all ancient knowledge. While much was lost, much also remained preserved through copies and sharing of texts by others. The story should serve as a reminder that knowledge needs to be preserved and cared for because it doesn't last alone. It requires individuals who appreciate it, safeguard it, and share it with others. While books and scrolls may deteriorate over time, ideas have the potential to endure indefinitely if we make an effort to keep them alive. Ultimately, the Library of Alexandria was not a mystical storehouse of hidden knowledge. It was an actual location created by ordinary destructions, individual, not destroyed by a single fire, but rather by gradually being forgotten over time. Perhaps the most important aspect of the tale is this: could there be more to this historical tale? Let's find out. The real story behind the Great Library. The Great Library of Alexandria has captivated people for a long time. Nowadays, it is known as the largest library of the ancient world, where all human knowledge was gathered and protected. However, upon closer examination, we discover that the true history of this library is not quite as people imagine. It is a story crafted from fragments, assembled over time, occasionally inaccurately, and frequently embellished to appear more mystical than it was. Let's begin with the most common story that is often told today. Many modern versions claim that the Library of Alexandria was established around the beginning of the 3rd century BC. The story goes that a man named Demetrios of Phaleron traveled to Alexandria after leaving Athens, where he had studied under Theophrastus, a student of the renowned philosopher Aristotle. Upon his arrival in Alexandria, Demetrios proposed to Ptolemy I Soter, the ruler of Egypt, the idea of building a vast library modeled after Aristotle's collection and educational institution in Athens known as the Lyceum. It is a lovely tale that gives the Library of Alexandria a prestigious beginning and a close tie to the greatest thinkers of the world. However, upon closer examination, this story does not hold up well. In reality, it is mostly constructed from various bits of information that do not always align. There is a narrative written 100 years later that credits Demetrios with establishing the library during Ptolemy I's reign, but this claim appears dubious. Other ancient accounts mention Demetrios, but they suggest his contribution occurred during Ptolemy II's rule, the son of Ptolemy I. Even then, Demetrios was not the sole individual involved in collecting books. People like Alexandros of Aetolia, Lycophron of Chalkis, and Zenodotos of Ephesus were also part of the effort. It becomes more complicated when we consider that Demetrios originally backed another person to be the next ruler after Ptolemy I. As a result, he was banished internally and passed away shortly afterward. This makes it difficult to imagine that he played a significant part in establishing the library during Ptolemy II's rule. Ultimately, we are unsure of the true founder of the Library of Alexandria or the exact date of its establishment. What is certain is that it was set up early in the city's history and contributed to making Alexandria a prominent hub of education for many years. However, referring to it as a library could be inaccurate. The Great Library of Alexandria was not a modern public library we are familiar with. It was not a single building with shelves of scrolls and reading areas. Instead, the collection of books was housed within a larger complex known as the Museion. The Museion was a place in ancient Greece that was dedicated to the 9 muses, who were goddesses of various arts and sciences. Each muse represented a different area of knowledge such as history, astronomy, poetry, music, and theater. The Museion served as a religious shrine and a place for education, research, and conversation. It was overseen by a priest appointed by the Ptolemaic kings and was meant to assist scholars in their studies. Based on the information available, the Museion was more than just a temple. It included various sections such as a lecture hall, a dining area, living spaces for scholars, a kitchen, gardens with statues, and shaded paths. Books were kept in rooms behind a row of columns, forming what is now known as the Great Library. Rather than envisioning a large building overflowing with scrolls, we should imagine a peaceful retreat where scholars resided and learned, with books kept nearby in modest, cozy rooms. Additionally, it is crucial to understand that Alexandria was not the sole location in the ancient world to have a shrine like this. Many other cities also had areas devoted to the Muses, particularly connected to places of education. For instance, Pythagoras proposed creating a shrine to the Muses in Croton to promote learning. Subsequently, the Seleucid rulers established one in Antioch, which included a library. During ancient times, temples often doubled as places to store books and encourage learning. Many modern stories about the library do not acknowledge this fact, however. They remove the books from the religious context and try to portray the library as a representation of purely secular knowledge. Even when discussing the Serapeum, one of the daughter libraries of the Great Library, it is commonly misrepresented as being transformed from a temple into a place of learning. This is inaccurate. The Serapeum has always been a temple dedicated to the god Serapis. The library housed within it was simply a component of the religious complex, not an addition at a later time. The same applies to the Museion, originally a temple with a collection of books and scholarly activities developing around it. While the Museian's book collection was large and significant, some of the claims about it are exaggerated. Many believe that renowned scholars were associated with the Great Library, but this is not always accurate. For instance, some claim Hipparchus studied there, even though he resided in Rhodes, and there is no concrete evidence of a visit to Alexandria. It is also debated whether Archimedes worked at the library, as most sources indicate he spent his life in Syracuse. Euclid and Herophilus may have studied there, but it is uncertain. The involvement of Dionysius of Thrace is also unclear due to lack of clear records. Hypatia, a famous figure associated with the library, lived later on. It's a common misconception that she was the final librarian of the Great Library, but this is not true. By the time she lived, both the main library and the one in the Serapeum had already been destroyed. While she was a talented philosopher and educator in Alexandria, she was not directly involved with the library. The Museion of Alexandria was known for being a great center of learning. It attracted some of the brightest intellectuals from ancient times. The book collection, now known as the Great Library, was highly esteemed and extensive for its era. However, it was not the mystical, never-ending hall of scrolls that is often envisioned today. It was situated within a religious institution and was utilized by scholars who resided and collaborated together in honor of the Muses. The true tale of the Great Library remains fascinating, but it is more down to earth. It was influenced by actual individuals, politics, and the everyday realities of ancient times. It was a setting where education and spirituality were intertwined, where scrolls were stored not in extravagant chambers, but in modest spaces off of shaded pathways. Though its origins are somewhat unclear, its influence on history cannot be denied. Ultimately, the Great Library of Alexandria was not destroyed by fire, and it was not a flawless collection of all human knowledge. It was an active part of a religious and intellectual community. making a lasting impact through years of focused study, exploration, and education. Perhaps this understated yet profound influence is just as enchanting in its subtle manner. The myth of a million scrolls. The Great Library of Alexandria has always had a mystical reputation. People have viewed it as a center of ancient wisdom, a shining symbol of education that used to contain all the world's secrets. Frequently referred to as the biggest and most significant library of ancient times, it is believed to have held more than 1.2 million scrolls. This figure is enormous, even when compared to modern libraries. However, upon closer examination, the reality is not as definitive or impressive as many stories suggest. The exact number of scrolls in the Great Library is unknown. Official records, precise numbers, and inventories from that time do not exist. Instead, we have ancient writings, stories passed down from others, and many estimations. As time passed, people started to exaggerate the number of scrolls, opting for the most impressive figures to make the story more interesting. The larger the number, the more devastating it seems when discussing the library's destruction. An instance comes from a well-liked book that received a lot of positive feedback, even though numerous historians did not agree with its portrayal of history. The book stated that the library had about 500,000 scrolls and that they were organized in alphabetical order, a new system at the time. While this may seem efficient, it may not be an accurate representation of reality. The concept of such a sophisticated system in ancient times might be more idealistic than true. Some writers suggested an even higher number. One author stated there were 1.2 million books in the library. This claim has been repeated frequently. However, the origin of these numbers is uncertain. Were they actual counts or simply estimates that became exaggerated over time through repeated storytelling? It appears likely that the latter is true. These figures originated from ancient sources that either borrowed from one another or appeared too exact to be reliable. One cause mentioned 54,800 scrolls, a suspiciously precise number that raises doubts rather than clarifies the situation. Ancient librarians had different methods of keeping records compared to what we use today. They did not have advanced systems to keep track of their scrolls. Even if they wanted to count everything, they probably lacked the time, tools, and motivation to do so. One historian mentioned that ancient numbers were not always precise, but were used more to awe readers. How do historians attempt to determine the actual size of the library? One method is by studying other ancient libraries. By examining the remains of these structures and determining the number of shelves or niches for scrolls, we can estimate the number of books they could have contained. However, this physical evidence is lacking for the Great Library of Alexandria. The exact location of the library in the city remains uncertain. Therefore, an alternative approach had to be employed. A historian from Columbia University took a new approach by studying the writers of the 3rd and 4th centuries BC rather than the buildings. He researched how many authors were known to be active during that time to estimate the number of scrolls wanted to store their works. Around 450 authors from the 4th century BC have writings that still exist in some form. Another 175 authors are from the 3rd century BC. Many of these writers likely did not write extensively, possibly only filling 1 or 2 scrolls. However, some, especially well-known playwrights, may have produced enough work to fill up to 100 scrolls each. The historian did not want to underestimate, so he decided to use a high estimate of 50 scrolls per writer. Despite the likelihood of it being too high, he chose to err on the side of caution. By using this number, he calculated that around 31,250 scrolls would be wanted to store all the works of all known authors up to the end of the 3rd century BC. Now let's compare that number, 31,250, with the larger numbers that people often mention, such as 500,000 or even a million. There is a huge difference between them. Even if we include some scrolls by unknown authors or copies of texts in various languages, we still don't reach anywhere near 500,000 scrolls. The concept of a library that massive with such a vast number of books starts to seem more like a myth than something real. Why do people continue to use these large numbers? It's because it adds more drama to the story. For example, when you picture a library holding 1 million books being destroyed, it feels like a significant loss. It seems as though the entire world has lost its memory in one devastating event. And when you're looking to assign blame for that loss, the bigger the number, the more severe the crime appears. Some writers have used these exaggerated numbers to point fingers at various groups, usually accusing religious extremists or invading armies. The reality is not as simple. The library might not have been as big or well organized as people think. There is also no definite evidence that it was destroyed all at once. The tale of its destruction, like its size, probably has been influenced more by imagination than facts over time. Even though the library had fewer scrolls, it was still significant in gathering knowledge and preserving learning. The library attracted a diverse range of intellectuals, including thinkers, poets, scientists, and historians. It symbolized the idea of sharing and storing knowledge, as well as bringing people from around the world together to learn and exchange ideas. The Great Library of Alexandria was more than just a storage space for scrolls. Its significance lay in its representation of knowledge preservation, rather than the quantity of scrolls it held. When we imagine the library as a vast collection of books, we are envisioning it as an ideal place where knowledge is eternal and ideas are safeguarded indefinitely. However, actual history is usually not as flawless. The library may have been smaller than what the stories claim. It was probably more disorganized, with fewer scrolls and no organized system for locating books, and had more constraints than the legends suggest. The quantity of scrolls is not as important as the effort put into creating the library. What is crucial is the concept of someone attempting to collect the knowledge of the world in one location, which is what has preserved the memory of the library. We may never find out how many scrolls were in the library, but we do know that it fascinated people around the world. It symbolizes knowledge, curiosity, and human ambition. What truly makes it remarkable is not its size, but its essence. What do you think about the Library of Alexandria? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, share, and subscribe to this channel for more celebrity gist. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.